elder next week. So that'll be next Sunday morning. So the way this flows, and we need to finish it today, and then we'll have a fresh section for the 4 Sundays of December. So I suppose you could open back up to Genesis chapter 1 and have that before you. So maybe I should start with, in this section, I had made a full, very dense statement that we were trying to unpack. And that statement was that the purpose of God in creating the universe was to redeem it by the rule of man in order to image the rule of God, so that we would know what it's like for all that is beautiful to depend upon God. And one purpose of unpacking that statement is to demonstrate that the thesis of what the image of God is fits with the end for which he made the world. And that needed to be done, we saw in the earlier section, to be the real, true, valid thesis. So that's the purpose of this chapter, but it has many higher purposes than that, because it just can't help but lift the soul. So we've covered the purpose of God, the fact that he has a purpose, in that it's somehow going to be manifested in the creation of the world, because he never acts without a reason. And so it starts with a great mystery of why he would create a bunch of non-God stuff and what that purpose might be. And we've covered that his purpose is to redeem it. And that brings us to today. We got 3 more parts of the statement to unpack, so I hope to do them today. So the part that we pick back up on is by the rule of man. So if you look back at Genesis chapter 1, the basic division to keep in your mind is 1 through 25 is a unit, and then 26 to the end of the chapter is a unit. From verse 26 forward, it should feel like Caesar crossing the Rubicon. That being a metaphor, most of you know, for a sort of point of no return. And the reason this point in verse 26, in which he makes man his image and hooks the rule of the world to him, it is a Rubicon, because it is no longer hooked to God, at least in the same way that it was prior to this point. So the redemption project may have begun by the rule of God, but once you get to verse 26, and every second of reality forward, it is now hooked to the rule of man in order to be completed. So it begins by the rule of God, but it's clear that it's going to be finished by the rule of man, which obviously begs the question of why God would do this, because it's certainly not obvious that you would want to do this. There's a Greek myth of Phaeton, where Apollo hooks his chariot to his son Phaeton, and he basically wrecks the whole world. I have a sneaking suspicion of where that originated from. It's like Lightning McQueen ruining everything in Radiator Springs. But so it's not obvious that this would be a good idea. So it begs the question why God would hook his whole world to man and his whole entire redemption project to him. It seems like it would be safer in God's hands. And so as we start to answer this question, we might remember, you can go ahead and turn to John chapter 1, the Gospel of John, because if you just start to maybe try to answer it by thinking about what we've seen so far in the creation account, we've seen that there are all these particular things. Remember, there's a chaos that's there in verse 2 of Genesis chapter 1. Basically everything is there, but it's strewn about in a chaos. And God begins to bring an order that is good. And so that's clear. And the second thing that's clear is that he does it by means of the Logos, his word. Okay, so it's all affected by this one thing called the Logos, the word. But I don't know if you ever thought about this before. If the Logos creates the world, then the Logos cannot itself be part of the world, which seems to be at least some of what John is saying in his prologue. So the Gospel of John begins with an 18-verse prologue, but I want you to just remark with me verses 1 to 5 and listen to John's comments on the creation of the world. He says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and apart from him, nothing came into being that has come into being." So everything that's in the come into being category came into being through him. "In him was life, and life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it." So here's the point. If the one that is causing the many to come together in a way that is good, and just to bring this down to earth, by the many, I'm talking about these flowers, your eyeballs, your ears. You have an ear right here rather than a foot sticking out. I mean, mice. I mean, clouds. I mean, lizards. I mean, all the order that you see in the, when we look around us, we particular things are not good, right? But thankfully, God has not let it go back to total chaos. So we can see flowers, birds, stars, and ourselves. And we can see this good order, but we cannot see the one thing that is causing the order. We cannot see what Paul preached to the pagans in Acts 17, the one in whom we live and move and exist. So we cannot see the Logos because the Logos is invisible, because the Logos, John tells us, is God, and God is invisible. So remember, we're trying to figure out why God would hook his redemption project to man. So the situation in Genesis chapter 1 is a lot like Thanksgiving is coming up, and so some of you are going to be in the kitchen. Imagine a situation in which you're in the kitchen and you see all the ingredients of the cake batter swirling around, but you don't see the whisk that's causing the swirling. Or imagine you go to a concert, or we're going to have a carol service, and we all sit here, and all of a sudden the piano starts being played. And you could get up and go over there. It's beautiful music, and you could see all the different keys moving, but you can't see the one that is causing all of this harmony. Or it would be like those children in Lewis's creation account of Narnia, in which they see all the particulars of Narnia, that world, come together, and they hear a sound, they hear a music that's causing it. But they can't see the source, okay? So that's what it's like to look about you and see all these particular things coming together, but you can't see the one God who's causing it because he's invisible. The many are visible. The one is invisible. So I think what Lewis is actually gifting us with, when you read the account of the creation of Narnia, in which you see all the particulars coming together in a way that is good by this sound, but then you finally see the sound is traced to a singular lion, and it's come out of the mouth of the lion, is he's given us an image of God that we can understand and project back onto Genesis chapter 1. To better help us understand what we're supposed to see in Genesis chapter 1. And I think this explains why God hooked his whole redemption project to man. For although God is the one that all things start out dependent upon in order to be arranged in a way that is good, by designating man to be the one that all things will continue to depend upon in order to finish being arranged in a way that is good, he's giving us an opportunity to experience an image of who he is in his relationship to creation. Because in this way, we can see both the one and the many. In the other way, we could just see the many, but not the one. But by making an image of himself, we can see both the one and the many. So, put it simply, if God did not hook the creation to us or some creature in this way, we could never experience what this connection is like. You never see it. But because he did hook it to us, now we can. So now our situation is just like those children in Arden. And that's why Lois is so helpful. Now we can see exactly what it is like for all things to depend upon one thing in order to be a blessing. If we will look at all things and then look at man and then see the connected blessing. And this is the whole key when Revelation says, by the one man, Christ Jesus, behold, I make all things new. The original logos through man. Who better, who knows how to do it than him? But that's a later chapter. So this made me think of Shocker, a lesson from Frozen 2. Particularly the directors of Frozen 2. So because I like those films, I dig into the background of them and how they thought through them. And according to one of the directors, Chris Buck, one of the challenges in Frozen 2 was trying to animate an invisible character. You have an invisible character in this one called Gale, because they have all these spirits. But the wind spirit was particularly tough, because it's invisible and it's hard to relate to. So they put in a scene, you'll remember this scene, but this scene is really there for the purpose of trying to help give some personality to this abstract, invisible character. So most animated films, the character is right there on the screen. It's weird to have a character that's invisible. So what they did was material things, which is the opposite of spiritual. They used material things to try to give it personality. So they used things like leaves, stick, brush, and even people's hair in this one scene. So the one I'm thinking of is Gale, after she's aggravated and calmed down, she teases Olaf and Sven by blowing through blowing Olaf around and then poofing out Kristoff's clothing. And in some funny way, and then Olaf names her right after that. They have Olaf give her a name. I'm going to call you Gale. And then she twirls around through the hair of Elsa and Anna, and they have Elsa make a remark like, "Are you in a better mood now?" And then they have her trail through the leaves and swirl around the statue of their parents to sort of reveal some truth, share some knowledge, at that point, which then helps them figure out some truth about their past. So by the time that whole scene ends, that whole little segment of about 15 seconds, the director's goal was to give a sense of the personality of this character, and they used material things to do it. And by the time that scene ends, you do have some real sense of this character, of this person, even though they're invisible. And so what seemed abstract and distant and unknowable at first then becomes concrete and close and very knowable. And similarly, if you think about it, the challenge in Genesis chapter 1 is how to communicate who God is when he's an abstract, invisible person, because he's not part of creation. Specifically, the question is, how do you communicate this beautiful connection between God and all things when part of the connection is invisible? And it's an invisible thing connected to visible things. They don't match. It's a significant problem because we're creatures, and that means, if you hadn't thought about this, the Christian world, well, you have in this church, you've heard it, creator-creation distinction. The difference in a biblical worldview and a pagan worldview is a Christian is a twoist, you could say, and a pagan is a oneist. So a pagan thinks there's just one thing called reality, and God exists, but it's almost like fish in an ocean. He's just bigger than us by degree, like he's a whale and we're a tadpole. But at any point, we may say that we're all in this together. That's not the Christian worldview. So Van Til used to draw on the board two circles. This represents God. This represents creation. They're separate. God is a qualitatively different sort of being than anything we can find within this creaturely existence. And so, by definition of who we are, part of our identity is to not understand that. And for God to come across abstract and invisible to us. So the creator is not the creation, and the creation can never become the creator. Even when we're glorified, sometimes in history you see apotheosis, the becoming of God, man becoming God. We never become God. Paul Washer asked one time, what's the difference between Gabriel and a cricket? Nothing in comparison to God. It's not like, well, he's closer to God. Everything in this circle is qualitatively different from the Lord. There's many Psalms about that. Who will you liken me? Who will you compare? There's no one like the Lord, and so forth. So the point is, it might be true that God is causing all these wonderful particulars to harmonize in a way that's good. I hope you believe that's true. Everything you see today is harmonized in some way that is good. And you know that God is doing this, for Paul tells us, in him we live and move and exist. He is holding all things together. So there is no fundamental particle that we will ever find that, like, oh, this proton is doing it. At the bottom of all dark matter, dark energy, whatever we find, is the word, the speech of God. The Logos is causing all this to happen. So he's doing this in a way that's good. And this connection, whatever it's like to experience, might be beautiful to see, but it seems like it'll have to remain something that only God can experience because we can't see it. For, as I've said, the one that is causing, I feel like I'm repeating this a lot, but sometimes it's like Paul saying, what do we say then? And you say justification in a little bit different way. God is for us. And so there's just different ways of saying it to help you get it. So let me finish this point that God has hooked it to man, or he's redeeming the world through the rule of man, to say, if to know God is to know him in this connection to creation as the one thing that's causing all things to come together in a way that's good, and if this is something we can't see, then it seems we can't know God. It seems we could never know God in this way. And this problem explains why he hooked his whole creation project to man. So let me go to the second point of the statement. Purpose of God in creating the universe is to redeem it by the rule of man in order to image the rule of God. This is what he's up to. Back to the beginning where I said the Bible. There's a reason why the interest in a bunch of, an invisible person created a bunch of visible stuff. Why? Why would God be interested and hooked it all to man? Is because he has an interest in of himself, in which the rule of man that we can see will image the rule of God that we can't see. And this image will be good for us because this image will allow us to experience the beauty of God. Now, let me give some examples or illustrations that maybe bring this home for children. And for those of us who still like to be childlike at heart, we like examples that make it easier to grasp. Every kid, at least I hope every kid, has walked barefoot in the mud at some point and experienced leaving behind your footprint. Well, I want you to imagine you do that, and then suppose later on you put on your shoes and you take your friend to this spot on the ground wherein is your footprint. And if they saw your footprint, would you agree that they know your foot? How would you answer that question? You'll probably say, well, no, and then, well, yeah. So in some ways, no, for they didn't see your foot. But then in some ways, yeah, because they saw a mold of your foot that does correspond to some truth about your foot. Now, I want you to imagine your friend, this is hard, but use your imagination, is locked inside a mud world, okay? And they can never experience anything but mud. So they can never experience flesh. So you can never experience your human foot. But he could still obtain some knowledge of your feet through the pattern of your footprint in the mud. Another example, have you ever put your hand into some partially dried concrete? People do that all the time. They're building something. The family does their little imprints, right? Everybody puts their hand in the concrete, leaving behind your handprint. It's the same thing there. Suppose your friend is locked inside a concrete world and could never experience the flesh of hands. They could still know your hand through the imprint on the concrete. Or finally, the ancient biblical analogy of an analogy is the king's signet ring, right? That he would put into a blob of wax. And then you go here, well, everybody that has never seen the king's ring, but they kind of have, because they know truth about the ring, even though they don't see it. And this is the analogical knowledge of God. So in the same way, think of this. God is the creator. We are the creation. This means we are locked into a created reality. There are aspects about being the creator which we could never understand. But suppose it were possible for God to use creation in such a way that he were to press his foot, as it were, or his handprint, or his signet ring, as it were, into the creation, such that creation were capable of taking on a form that corresponded to a truth of the Creator. Could we then know God? Yes. And that's why Wayne Grudem would say in his systematic theology, we know God truly, but never fully. So there are things we can know about him analogically through creation. This is how creation reveals God. Heavens declare the glories of God. It doesn't mean God is a hydrogen atom, but somehow hydrogen strewn all throughout the universe communicates something that does genuinely correspond to God. So every animal, I mean, this is crazy when you start thinking about it. All the animals in the ocean, each one, a seahorse, is an embodiment of an invisible thought of God. That's one of his thoughts. And he has seahorsey thoughts. That's one of them. Now you just could go through all of creation and see all of his thoughts. But, okay, so that's the idea. So, of course, it would be different in many respects to the beautiful connection that God knows and experiences between himself and all things. But it would be genuine. It would be a genuine image of this connection so that we could genuinely experience it too. So think of the fundamental claim of Genesis chapter 1 about God is that God is the one thing that causes all things to come together in a way that's good. Therefore, if we were able to see one thing in creation, causing all things, all the other things in creation to come together in a way that's good, we would see an image of God. And this is exactly what he's done by hooking the whole creation to man. He's done this in order to give us an image that we can see of that which we cannot see. Of the one singing all of Narnia into existence, we realize that God's example, the lion is man. Aslan represents humanity. Aslan represents Adam in God's way of doing it. So human nature, humanity, by being designated the image of God in Genesis 1, is the one thing that causes all things, Romans 8:28, to come together in a way that is good. And in this way, humanity is the image of God on earth. The rule of man on earth is the image of the rule of God on earth. That's why he's redeemed the world through the rule of man. So, doing it this way accomplishes his purpose of having an image of himself for us to experience. So that leads us to the last question, which is why God would want to give us an image of himself. And so far as I know, Jonathan Edwards and Herman Bavinck are the only theologians that have written a lot on this. And Jonathan Edwards has written most on it. What's the motive of God? What's the higher purpose of imaging himself? What made him want to do this? So we go to the last. This is so amazing. These are some of the highest thoughts you'll ever have in your life as I wrap this sermon up with this last point. The purpose of God, so we're at the end of the statement, in creating the universe is to redeem it by the rule of man in order to image the rule of God in this last part, so that we would know what it's like for everything that is beautiful and whole and sings and gives joy and makes you feel healthy and good and joyful and happy. What it's like for all of it to depend upon God alone. So, in trying to answer this question, I want you to imagine something you've probably never done. I want you to imagine what it would be like to be God. In reverence, I want you to imagine this. What would it feel like? Would you be happy, do you think? If you had the consciousness that you are God? Would you feel safe? Would you be sure that everything is going to be all right? Would you be at peace? Of course you would. You would be God. Who or what could ever threaten it? To actually be God and to experience the life of the Trinity as a member of the Trinity What would that be like? Would it not be like to experience the goodness of all that is beautiful depending on God? For that is what you would be experiencing. Everything that is beautiful, and it would be all dependent upon God. If there's one thing you would know that. And each member of the Trinity knows that. The Spirit searches all things, even the depths of God. No one knows the Father but the Son, right? All those verses. So, another way of saying this is it would be to experience one thing causing all things to harmonize in a way that is a blessing. And there being no threat of it ever coming loose. God experiences this. This is why he's called the Blessed Trinity. He's happy. And there's no threat to his happiness. He's at peace. And there's no threat to his peace. He's in love in the ultimate romance story, in the highest sense of that term, the most holy, sacred sense of that term. And there's never a danger of it being disrupted. Theologians distinguish, I talked about too, is theologians distinguish between God's acts or experiences ad intra versus ad extra, which is just Latin for within versus without, and trying to conceptualize that God has experiences within his own being that are not even shared with creation. And then there are obviously some that are, since we know him truly but not fully. God's experiences ad intra within himself, some of them cannot even ever be shared with creation. Ever. Doesn't matter how many millions of years we've been singing Amazing Grace. They could never be shared because never the two shall meet. But apparently some of them can, at least to some degree, and these experiences are called ad extra, meaning outside of himself, because creation is capable of containing a stamp of it, a form of it, an analogy of it. And apparently, one such experience is the feeling of knowing that one thing is causing all things to come together in a way that's a blessing, and invincibly so. So I want you to keep imagining with me what kind of peace and joy and explosions of happiness would that fountain out and eject out of your soul to experience that consciousness. As we say, only God knows. But he created, what we're saying here in this series is he created this world to share that experience with us. This is the end for which God created the world. Jonathan Edwards, I've already mentioned, put it this way, that the chief end God had in mind in creation was his desire to communicate his happiness to the creature. God has a desire to somehow get out of himself and share with creation how happy he is, and to include you in it. The private happiness of God has a desire to become the public happiness of God. His purpose is to share with creatures in himself, so that his creatures could feel the same security and joy and stability in their souls that he feels and knows his. So, what would it be like? Go back to the question I asked. What would it be like to know that all things are held together by one thing in a way that's an unchangeable blessing? Apparently, it's similar to creation falling apart and being put back together again. Apparently, that's a form in the wax. It's something like that. So what God is saying, if you want to know what it feels like to be God, then enmesh yourself in this story and feel the ups and downs and climax and conclusion of the story, and it's something like that. It's something like that. Apparently that communicates it. For apparently, keep thinking with me, keep diving, only then could you forever be convinced that nothing could ever really stop all things from coming together in a way that is good. Nothing could ever really stop the safety and goodness from happening inside your soul if you knew that all things would be put back together again after they fall apart, and even better than they were the first. And I think this, I had the thought yesterday, this taps into the unity of God, the boundlessness of God, that He's unlimited. That feeling at the end of a story where it's like it's back to the harmony of the beginning, but a little bit better. God infinitely experiences that. It's every day is better for Him. It's crazy. Chesterton had this quote, I think it's in Orthodoxy, where he's like, there's something new about the sun every day. Almost like a little child, when they have something they like their parent is doing, they're saying, do it again. Do it again. It's this repetition on the one hand. It's like you're doing the same thing, but it's just, there's a new jolt of happiness every time, and the kid is just being tickled. Chesterton literally said that's how he thinks of God making the sun rise every day. It's like the Lord is saying, let's do it again. Such a crazily different worldview to have. And how just low has our worldview been with what the scriptures are offering to us. So, where was I at here? So, this feeling, if you could experience it, be created, fall apart, be put back together again, however you would feel right there, that is the form of bringing in the wax. That is the parallel that corresponds to God's soul. And that is what He's aiming at. That would be knowing Him by analogy. So that's what He's been after in your whole entire life since He made you, trying to make you feel that. Now that I'm all right being in the story of every sin you ever committed, every time you ever thought about shooting yourself, every time you ever thought about you were a failure, every time you ever thought nobody will ever love you, every time you lost a game, you tried to learn how to play an instrument, it didn't work, you failed, every time you experienced something good, every time you ate apple pie, everything that ever happened in your life and is happening today, God is aiming at producing that feeling in you. So we just got to hold on, right? Keep turning the pages. But to tease you with it, let me ask in this section here whether you already know this or not, just to be sure we seal this down. You may say you already know. Oh yeah, I know Romans 8:28. God's working everything out for good. Everything's coming together in a way that's good. I already know it. No, we don't know that yet. Keep thinking with me these high, wonderful, glorious Christian thoughts. Because you are close. And we are very soon going to know it if you're a Christian. So I've asked you to imagine what it would be like to be God. Now I want you to come back down. It's still high, but within your realm. And I want you to imagine resurrection morning. I want you to imagine somehow rising from the dead and feeling, we've played in sand at the beach, right? And then come up, you feel the sand coming off your skin. What will that feel like? dirt coming off your skin. I want you to imagine that day and all the days thereafter. Very likely, everyone in this room is not going to die fast. As a matter of fact, most of us in this room are very probably going to experience the dishonor of slowly breaking down and finally decomposing and falling apart into dust. But let's say you did die in some extreme way and your ashes ended up scattered everywhere. There's no hope of ever putting the puzzle back together into one place. Maybe you had a sea burial or some kind of genetic disease and some member, some limb crippled and fell away. You can throw in cancer. Cancer morphs the body in a chaotic way. So whatever chaos you like. Now, on resurrection morning, can you fathom what it will be like to experience those parts back together again? I want you to think of looking at the face of a loved one that you have seen, but at this moment in time, it has already fallen apart. And what would it be like to see their face after you know it has already fallen apart? To look at it again. When Christians talk about resurrection, that's what we're talking about. You will see them put back together again. You will hear them laugh again. You'll hear the sound of their voice again. Their eyeballs will be put back together again. You will look into their eyes again. And when you do, you will realize that they will never, ever, ever, ever fall apart again. And then you will know something of happiness, of what it's like to be God. Because then you will be fully aware. You won't be living by faith anymore. You'll be living by sight. You will be fully aware within your soul. It's not even a debate on that day that all of this happened, that God and God alone is the wisdom and the power and the love who made this happen. So in terms of our Hobbit friends, you've had creation, but not second creation. You've experienced people 1.0, but you have not yet experienced humanity 2.0. So Robert Murray McShane wrote this old hymn, then, Lord, I shall fully know. Then you will know, but you have not yet experienced this. So just think, what will you be experiencing? You will be experiencing what it's like for all that is beautiful to depend on God alone. That's what because you'll be experiencing all these beautiful things, and you will know that it's completely from Him. Now, listen to these words. The unspeakable joy that will gush from your soul in that moment is why God created the world. Listen to that earlier statement again. The purpose of God in creating the universe is to, by the rule of man, in order to image the rule of God, so that we would know what it's like for all that is beautiful to depend upon God. Absolutely everywhere you will walk, you will find things put back together again, and all because of God alone. The safety, the peace, the joy, the happiness is something you have to experience to understand. And God's purpose is to give you that universe, but in such a way that you have to depend entirely upon Him alone, even to the point of falling to pieces first. As Paul put it in 2 Corinthians, we have the sentence of death in ourselves, 2 Corinthians chapter 1, so that we would not hope in ourselves, but in God who raises the dead. It is a different kind of dependence to die and to pray the prayer of Psalm 16. Preserve me, O God, for I take refuge in you, and to fall to pieces in the dirt, and then to be raised from the dead. That is trusting the Lord in a way that's a little bit different than saying, let's just pray we'll have a safe trip home today. Then, for every future day, you'll be seeing more and more things that are all held together as a blessing by the one thing of God, and by knowing God the way God knows God. But it'll be His image, literally everywhere you look. Because everywhere you look, you will see things that have been put back together, and you will see the one man who made it happen, the man Christ Jesus. And you will see the connection from His death on the cross to every bird in existence. And by that, you will know God, the love of God, the grace of God, the certainty, the assurance of God. So let me end with this. I discovered this word called kintsugi. It's a Japanese form of pottery. And I just thought, what a cultural thing. I like all cultures, Mexicans, I like their queso and all kinds of stuff. There's something good in every culture, something bad in every culture too. But kintsugi, it's like, this is something. This is something. It's a Japanese form of pottery that takes broken things and puts them back together again. And it uses gold lacquer between the cracks. And in Japanese culture, it is regarded as one of the most valuable things you could ever possess in your home. Now track with me as to why. The first step in making a piece of kintsugi art is you must have an item of value. It's number one, first condition. Maybe a family heirloom that's sentimental to you, your father's coffee mug, something like that. Okay, so that would be step one. The second step is you must have accidentally broken this item. You can't purposely, you can't just say, we're just going to make some kintsugi and boom, and throw it down. That's not regarded as genuine kintsugi art. You have to accidentally break this item of value. The reason for this is only if it breaks accidentally can it be regarded as a true tragedy. Now, if both of those conditions are fulfilled, then you not only will have this original item of value, but you'll have lost it through a tragedy. The final condition is to have an artist called a kintsugi master who can bring it all back together again, all restored, all put back together. And the idea that they're expressing in the gold lacquer in between all the cracks is to say that this item now has even more value than when it started with. In their culture, this art form contains the whole idea of story within it, of there being a happy ending that's actually happier than the beginning. Remember, I told you in every story, it's like begins and ends in garden, it begins and ends in the ballroom, and there's an equilibrium that's disrupted, and then it's all put back together again, but then again, it's a little higher and better than when it started. So you not only get your original item back, but you get it back just rivered through with the theme of redemption and held together tighter and less likely to break than it was to start with. It's truly something. Obviously, you see the illustration there that what we've seen in this particular chapter, the image of God and purpose of God, is that God is the ultimate kintsugi master. For his purpose in creating the universe was to allow us to experience the tragedy of it falling apart, so that after we are all put back together in the resurrection, we'll experience this precious life beyond its original value. So we've how many times have we looked at young children or a baby, and you'll hear a woman say she's so precious? Yes. What will it be like to say it in 2.0? For on that day, when we see each other's faces, when we see a flock of birds, a herd of deer, a waterfall, or even just a blade of grass, or hear some children playing and laughing, we'll know in our bones it really is good for everything that is beautiful to depend on God. For we will be experiencing the rule of God through the rule of the man Christ Jesus. That's what we'll be experiencing. The kingdom of God. We'll be looking at the one humanity of Christ and in all the particular things of reality. And we'll know they have all come together into a blessing from the singular force of him who hung on the tree. And this will be the image of God that we go on experiencing in new ways forever and ever. So, in one way, we could say that there had to be a resurrection because there was death. In another way, we could say there had to be a death so that there could be a resurrection. In one way, we could say things had to be put back together again because they fell apart. In another way, we could say we needed to experience them fall apart so that we could experience them being put back together again. And I think this is the reason the whole story begins like it does in Genesis 1:2, with a decomposed creation. And here's the end. We're wrapping up. And so that we would not be afraid at God's ability to put it all back together again. And you children, listen to this. If we believe that all the matter and energy of the universe was put together out of a chaos of pieces to start with, then why would we doubt he could do it again? And this seems to me to be Paul's meaning in Acts 26:8. When he looks at people in his preaching and he says, why is it considered incredible among you people if God does raise the dead? He seems to be saying, did you even understand the doctrine of creation? That the Lord put your body together from a bunch of chaotic pieces to start with? In other words, Paul has the confidence of a little child who has looked upon a shattered puzzle that they have already witnessed their father put back together again before. And he's suggesting that that is the confidence we should have when we bury one another. And we think of each other returning to dust. It's only a chaos comparable to the original creation. Genesis 1:2, which God overcame before and formed us, so we know he can do it again, if that is his purpose. Because Job 42:2 tells us, then Job answered the Lord and said, I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. So after next week, at the ordination of Justin, for the whole December will be, this is a shift. This is a shift, and everything after this is application. So these are the high thoughts. This is the shift. And obviously this truth has profound implications that need to be translated into applications to life. Because, for instance, should our faith be applied to all of life or some of life? Should we look upon this world in light of this? Should we look upon this world as a place where God's purpose is to be manifested? Or are there some places where it should be excluded because it does not belong there? So the next chapter is called The Image of God and the Boundary of God. And the clue is, there is no boundary. That's a spoiler alert. He comes to make his blessings flow far as the curse is found. So it will turn out to fit into Christmas quite all right. So let me pray before Ryan comes to finish us with song. Lord, we thank you for the holy privilege of preaching, of Christian preaching, of church, of brothers and sisters in the Lord, and for your gospel and your word and your message and your word, and the ability to learn more and to understand more and to just have our souls stretched, as it were, and expanded and elated with such sunshiny, warm, golden truth as this. And so, Lord, we just ask that you would help all the saints here to ingest this, download this, feel this, and that it would begin to translate into the way that we look at each other, serve one another, seek to bless one another, and everywhere where we see brokenness in this world and one another and anyone here, we would look upon that in a different and new way as a result of this. Thank you for today, Lord. Thank you for my salvation. Thank you for your grace. Thank you that people like us can have such a hope like this. In Jesus' name, amen.